All right, let's dive into one of the hottest debates in America, gun rights. We're going deep, beyond the usual talking points with this video essay you sent over, laying out arguments for and against gun rights, adding historical context, even crunching some stats. It's going to be fascinating.
You hit the nail on the head. This topic is woven into American history and identity. We're talking the Second Amendment, ratified back in 1791, part of the Bill of Rights, right alongside those cornerstones of freedom like speech and religion.
It makes you think, why did the founders consider bearing arms so essential? Was it all about practicality, or was there a deeper meaning behind it?
Well, you have to imagine America was a brand new nation, fresh from a revolution where they'd fought against the British trying to disarm colonists. The founders saw an armed citizenry as vital, not just for self-defense, but as a safeguard against tyranny. They believed it was a crucial check on government power.
So it's this tension between individual liberty and collective security baked right into the Second Amendment. That's pretty cool. But the video essay also points out how the interpretation of the Second Amendment has, evolved, right?
Absolutely. Initially, it was seen as a collective right, tied to the need for a well-regulated militia. But over time, a shift occurred, with more and more emphasis on the individual right to own firearms for self-defense. This all culminated in landmark Supreme Court cases like District of Columbia v. Heller in 2008.
So Heller really was a game changer.
It was a huge moment. The court struck down a handgun ban in D.C., ruling that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to possess a firearm unconnected with militia service. And they specifically stated this right is for traditionally lawful purposes, like self-defense at home.
That's a big deal. It seems like the court was acknowledging that self-defense is a core element of the Second Amendment.
Yeah, and just a couple years later, in 2010, McDonald v. City of Chicago extended that individual right to all levels of government, not just federal.
So the highest court weighed in, but the debate's still going strong. I think this is where it gets really interesting, this idea of firearms as the great equalizer for self-protection.
Right.
It's powerful.
The logic's compelling. Firearms can empower people to defend themselves against attackers, regardless of physical differences. It levels the playing field.
Because in a physical confrontation, strength and size often dictate the outcome. But a firearm changes that. I can see why that would be appealing, especially to those who feel vulnerable.
Exactly. Imagine being alone at home or walking alone at night. Having a firearm can provide a sense of security and control. But it also raises a question. Does owning a gun actually deter crime?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? The video essay mentions some conflicting statistics and studies around defensive gun use, right?
It does. Gun rights advocates often point to studies estimating millions of defensive gun uses, or DGUs, happen annually, suggesting firearms play a significant role in preventing crime.
Millions. That's huge. But the video essay also mentions some problems with those numbers, right?
Yes. Critics argue many of these self-reported DGUs can't be verified independently. They point out potential flaws in the methodology of some studies, concerned about overestimation.
So we're in a gray area, tough to pinpoint how effective firearms are at deterring crime. It's not a simple yes or no.
Exactly. The research is complex and hotly debated. But we can't ignore the fact that millions of Americans own firearms for reasons beyond personal safety. There's a whole other dimension to this.
Right, it's not just self-defense. There's recreation, traditions, the sport of it all. The video essay dives into this too, doesn't it?
It does. Take hunting, for example. For many, it's a deep tradition, a way to connect with nature and provide food.
For some, it's a vital part of their cultural heritage, passed down through generations.
Then there's competitive shooting. Sports like trap shooting, skeet shooting, and long-range rifle competitions require incredible skill, precision, and focus.
You see those Olympic shooters? It's amazing how they hit a target from so far away. It shows their dedication and how precise firearms can be.
And we can't forget the historical and artistic value some people find in firearms. For collectors, they're more than tools. They're pieces of history, often beautifully made and representing different eras.
It's interesting, isn't it? A firearm can be for self-preservation, a piece of sporting equipment, a historical artifact, even a work of art. But let's shift gears for a second and talk numbers. The video essay lays out some pretty stark statistics about gun ownership in America. What stood out to you?
Well, the sheer scale of gun ownership in the U.S. is striking. Current estimates indicate that about 32% of American adults own guns, which translates to an estimated 393 million firearms in civilian hands.
Wait, so more guns than people? That's crazy, especially compared to other developed countries. It really underscores how unique America's relationship with firearms is. But the video essay also cautions against looking at just the raw numbers, right?
Yes, it emphasizes that gun ownership isn't uniform across the country. Rates vary significantly by region and demographics. We see higher concentrations of gun ownership in rural areas compared to cities. And demographics like gender and race also play a role, with white Americans and men more likely to own guns.
It's like a demographic map of gun ownership would be pretty fascinating and maybe even a little unsettling.
Indeed. And it highlights the complexities we need to consider when we talk about gun rights and gun control. It's not a simple issue, but one with many layers and nuances.
Speaking of nuances, we have to address the elephant in the room, gun violence. The video essay doesn't shy away from this, does it?
Not at all. It tackles head-on the reality that America has a much higher rate of gun violence compared to other developed countries. In 2020 alone, there were approximately 45,000 gun-related deaths in the United States, a truly sobering statistic.
That's a difficult number to hear, and I imagine it fuels the debate around gun control even more.
It does. But it's crucial to understand the breakdown of those deaths. Roughly 54% were suicides, highlighting the importance of considering mental health when we discuss gun violence. The remaining deaths encompass homicides, accidents, and other causes.
It's a stark reminder that gun violence is complex with multiple contributing factors. It's not just about the firearms themselves, but the societal and individual circumstances surrounding their use.
Absolutely. But now that we've established this broader context, let's get into the heart of the debate. The video essay does a great job of unpacking the core arguments on both sides of this incredibly polarized issue.
Okay, listener, get ready. We're about to step into the ring where the battle for and against gun control plays out. I'm curious to hear how the video essay frames these opposing viewpoints.
Well, on one side, you have gun rights advocates standing firm by the Second Amendment.
They see it as this unwavering right, a cornerstone of American freedom.
Exactly. And they view the Heller decision as a decisive victory, affirming the individual's right to own firearms, particularly for self-defense.
Right, and their argument goes beyond personal protection. They often tie gun ownership to this broader concept of liberty and self-reliance, a distrust of government overreach.
Yes, it's this deep-seated belief that an armed citizenry is essential to safeguard all other freedoms, a legacy of America's fight for independence.
It's a compelling narrative. But the video essay also gives voice to the other side, gun control advocates who are deeply concerned about the levels of gun violence in America.
Absolutely. They argue that the easy access to firearms makes violence more deadly. They point to the devastating statistics on gun-related deaths and push for stricter regulations to save lives.
So they're challenging this idea that more guns equal more safety. Instead, they're saying, hey, maybe stricter controls could actually make us safer.
Precisely. They often advocate for measures like universal background checks to prevent individuals with criminal records or mental health issues from obtaining firearms. They also push for waiting periods to potentially prevent impulsive acts of violence, particularly suicides.
It's a stark contrast to the guns don't kill people, people kill people argument often used by gun rights advocates.
It is. And this is where the debate gets especially heated, particularly when it comes to certain types of firearms.
You mean like assault weapons?
Yes. The video essay highlights the controversies surrounding this term, which is often debated and lacks a clear, universally accepted definition. But generally, gun control advocates argue that these weapons, with their high rates of fire and large magazine capacities, are designed for military use and contribute to the severity of mass shootings.
Their argument being that these types of weapons are inherently more dangerous and have no legitimate purpose for civilian use.
Exactly. They see banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines as a common-sense measure to reduce the potential for mass casualties.
But I imagine gun rights advocates have a different take on this.
They do. They often argue that bans on assault weapons are based on how they look rather than how they function. They point out that many semi-automatic rifles share similar features with so-called assault weapons and argue that these bans infringe on the rights of law-abiding citizens.
So they see it as a slippery slope where banning certain types of firearms could lead to restrictions on all firearms.
Exactly. And they emphasize that criminals don't follow laws. They argue that stricter gun control measures would only impact responsible gun owners, not those who obtain firearms illegally.
It's this clash of ideologies, isn't it? It feels like both sides are operating from such different worldviews, which makes finding common ground incredibly difficult.
It does. And it's a debate that's often fueled by emotion, personal experiences and deeply held beliefs.
All right, listener, we've laid the groundwork. We've explored the history, the legal issues, the statistics, and the core arguments on both sides of the gun control debate. But this is just the beginning. So we're back. We've just dipped our toes into this intricate world of gun rights in America. I'm now kind of curious how these arguments we've talked about actually play out in the real world. Like, how do they translate into specific policies and laws?
Yeah, that's where the rubber hits the road, right? The video essay actually takes us right into that legislative arena where the battle for and against gun control is happening. It's this constant back and forth between those who want stricter laws and those advocating for gun rights.
So let's get specific. What are some of the key battlegrounds that the video essay highlights?
One of the big ones is background checks. Gun control advocates often push for universal background checks on all gun sales, even those between private individuals. The idea is to close what they see as loopholes that let people with criminal records or histories of mental illness get firearms without being properly checked out.
Yeah, it does seem like common sense to a lot of people. I mean, don't we want to keep guns out of the hands of those who might be a danger?
The video essay points out that this is where a lot of disagreement comes in. Gun rights advocates often say that criminals, by their very nature, don't follow the law. They argue that stricter background checks would mostly just burden law-abiding citizens, creating more paperwork without actually addressing the root causes of gun violence.
I see. So it's like, are you trying to stop every single bad thing from happening, even if it means a lot of people who aren't the problem get inconvenienced?
Exactly. The video essay also dives into other really debated areas, like waiting periods for buying guns. Gun control advocates argue that these cooling-off periods could reduce those impulsive acts of violence, especially suicides. The idea is that waiting a few days might give someone time to reconsider before doing something they'd regret.
I can see how that makes sense. If someone's in a really emotional state, maybe a few days to cool down could prevent a tragedy.
But then, gun rights advocates see waiting periods as infringing on their Second Amendment rights. They say it creates an unnecessary delay for responsible gun owners who might need a firearm right away for self-defense. Like, what if I need to protect myself right now and I have to wait a week?
So it all comes back to this tension between individual rights and safety for everyone. Lawmakers are constantly trying to find that balance.
Yeah, and the video essay doesn't shy away from the most controversial part of this debate, banning certain types of firearms. It specifically looks at the efforts to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines.
Oh, this is where it gets really heated, right? Even just what you call them is debated. What exactly is an assault weapon?
The video essay acknowledges there's no one definition everyone agrees on. But generally, it describes semi-automatic rifles that have certain things in common with military-style weapons, things like pistol grips, detachable magazines, and flash suppressors. Gun control advocates say these weapons, with their fast firing rates and large capacity magazines, are made for war and shouldn't be in civilian hands.
They point to those mass shootings where these kinds of weapons have been used with horrific results. Their argument is that limiting access to them could help prevent, or at least reduce, the severity of these tragedies.
Exactly. But gun rights advocates say these bans are based on how the guns look, not how they actually work. They argue that many other semi-automatic rifles can do the same things, and that focusing on these specific features is pointless and unfair. They also say that law-abiding citizens have a right to own these firearms for self-defense, hunting, or sport shooting.
So it's like if someone's going to cause harm, they'll find a way, no matter what kind of gun they can get.
Yeah, and they often bring up that slippery slope argument, saying that banning certain types of firearms could eventually lead to bans on all guns. Where do you draw the line, right?
It's definitely complex, with good points on both sides. I think what makes this whole debate so difficult is that it's not just about laws. It goes deeper into our culture and society.
And the video essay gets into that too. It explores this idea of gun culture in America, how it influences the way we see and think about firearms.
Yeah, we've talked about the history of gun ownership in America, that sense of self-reliance and the right to bear arms as a way to limit the government's power.
Right. And the video essay goes further, looking at how those historical and cultural factors have shaped this unique relationship with firearms in the U.S. It's often tied to ideas of masculinity, individualism, and freedom.
It shows how gun ownership is just a deeply ingrained part of life for many Americans. It's something passed down through generations, connected to traditions like hunting and sport shooting, and seen as a basic right that people are really passionate about protecting.
And that cultural aspect makes the debate even more complex. It's not just statistics or legal arguments. It's about values and beliefs.
It becomes part of their identity. It's who they are, how they see themselves.
Exactly. The video essay also looks at the role of the media in shaping how the public sees things. It explores how mass shootings and other gun violence are covered and how that coverage can actually influence public opinion and the political discussions around gun control.
Yeah, it seems like every time there's a mass shooting, it brings the debate back and makes people even more divided. The media has this tough job of reporting on those horrific events without making them seem even worse or adding to the fear and division.
It's a difficult balance to strike. The video essay points out that these events often lead to people demanding action, either pushing for stricter gun control or even buying more guns because they feel less safe.
It's a tough cycle to break. And then you have the mental health aspect, which is often brought up, especially after mass shootings.
Yes, the video essay is careful about not oversimplifying the link between mental health and gun violence.
Right.
While mental health is a huge factor to think about, it's important to avoid making people with mental illnesses seem dangerous. Most of them are not violent at all.
Right. It's about looking at all the different things that lead to violence, including societal problems like poverty, inequality, and not having access to good mental health care.
Right. Focusing only on mental health makes the problem seem simpler than it is and might distract from other important areas that need attention.
So it's not just about helping individuals, but making a healthier society overall where violence is less likely to happen in the first place. But before we finish this part of our dive, there's one more thing the video essay brings up that I think is important: the global perspective.
Yeah, looking at how other countries, especially developed nations, approach gun rights and gun control. That's a great point.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time dissecting gun rights in America, the history, the legal stuff, the culture clashes, even the emotional weight of it all. But I'm realizing we've kind of left out a whole other side of this. How does the rest of the world deal with guns?
It's a good question, right? And the video essay does look at how other developed nations approach gun control. Makes you think, is America unique in how it handles firearms?
Yeah, for sure. Lay it on me. What are some of the examples that really stand out?
Well, Australia's a pretty striking one. They had that terrible mass shooting back in 1996, and the public was outraged. Led to a lot of big changes in their gun laws.
Mm.
One of the most impactful was this mandatory buyback program.
Wait, mandatory buyback? You mean they made people turn in certain kinds of guns?
They did. It was a big decision, and not everyone liked it. But the video essay points out that Australia hasn't had a mass shooting like that one since. It makes you think that taking hundreds of thousands of guns out of circulation really did make a difference in reducing gun violence.
Wow, that's a powerful example. What about other countries? How do they do it?
Well, Canada has a different approach. Everyone who owns a gun there has to get a license, and that means passing a safety course, going through background checks, and they even keep track of you after you get the license. They're also much stricter about what kinds of guns you can even own.
So it's more like a system with a bunch of checks in place. You just can't go and buy a gun easily.
Exactly. It's less about reacting to problems and more about preventing them by making sure gun owners are trained and responsible.
It sounds like a totally different way of thinking about it compared to the US where, we see gun ownership as a right.
Yeah, it is. And the video essay also takes us to Japan, which is even stricter. Getting a gun there is really hard. We're talking in-depth background checks, mental health evaluations, you got to take written exams, shooting tests, the whole thing.
Man, that sounds like a lot to go through.
Oh, it is. Plus, they tightly control where and how you can even get a gun. There aren't many gun shops, and the types of guns you can legally own are very limited. So what's the result? Japan has one of the lowest rates of gun violence anywhere.
It's amazing how different countries have come up with such different ways of handling this. What would you say are the main things we can learn from these international examples?
Well, I think it shows that there isn't one solution that will fix everything for everyone. Every country has its own unique history, culture, and social context that shapes its approach to gun control. What works in one place might not work somewhere else.
But we can still learn something,
For sure. By looking at what other countries have tried, what worked, what didn't, we can get a broader perspective and maybe find solutions that could be adapted to work in the U.S.
It's like we're looking for tools that will work for our specific situation.
Exactly. But just copying a policy from another country probably won't work.
Mm-hmm.
We have to consider all the details, the cultural differences, and the specific problems here in the U.S.
Right, there's no magic solution. It's about being open to new ideas and having honest conversations.
You got it. This whole deep dive into the video essay has really shown me how important it is to think critically, especially when we're talking about tough, emotional issues like this. It's about staying curious, questioning what we think we know, and being open to different points of view.
I totally agree. It feels like we've only just begun to explore all the different aspects of this complicated issue. We've gone through the history, the legal battles, the cultural divides, the heartbreaking statistics, and the approaches other countries are taking. It's clear that there are no easy answers, no quick fixes, but what we can do is stay informed, talk to each other respectfully, and keep trying to understand this debate that affects so many people. If the founders could see America now with its unique relationship with guns, its tragic levels of gun violence, and its strongly divided opinions, what would they think? Would they still see the Second Amendment as the answer or as part of the problem? It's something to think about as we try to find our way through this difficult and complex issue. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.